Hi, welcome for your first lesson for Chapter 5 of A Wrinkle in Time. Our notes are going to start to look a little bit different than what we did in the past. We're going to do something called gathering evidence. So before I did have you writing some questions or writing answers to questions, and I wanted you to include some text details. But I was a little lenient as far as how specific they were. We are going to start to gather actual quotes. As we're reading, we're going to pull out the specific words. So I want to point out one misconception that we have quite a bit is that sometimes when we hear quotes, we think dialogue. So dialogue is when characters are talking. But when I'm asking you to pull a quote, I'm not asking you to just grab dialogue of what people are saying. What I'm asking you to do is take the exact words from the book. You're going to put it in quotes because it's not your words. And by putting in quotes, you are giving credit to the person who has said it. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's take a look at your Chapter 5 Gathering Evidence paper, which looks like this. And I've tried to make it nice and big so that you can see it on your screen easier, but you should also have yours. And you're going to be writing on it as we go along. So there are some prompts. These are the questions that you'll be expected to answer and be looking for evidence for. So prompt 1 says, the reader learns what a tesseract is. Yay, finally, we've been wondering, what's a tesseract? We finally get an explanation in this chapter. In addition to that, you will need to, well, not in addition, you haven't done anything yet. So we learn, but to learn and understand it, we need to do the next step. Explain the 5 dimensions and connect these to your own description of what a tesseract is. The second prompt that we'll be trying to find the evidence for in Chapter 5 reads, once the children learn about the tesseract, that's a typo. I'll have it, no, I won't have it fixed. I already turned them in. So let's fix it on our paper. So once the children learn about the tesseract, the crisis begins to develop. So right now, while we're doing this though, I'm fixing it for next year. The crisis begins to develop more. So fix that on your paper so it makes sense. I'm sorry about that typo. I updated it for this year. Describe 2 conflicts using specific text details that occur in Chapter 5. Okay, so now we know the prompts, but what do we do with them? Let's take a look at the directions. We're going to look down. There are 3 sets of directions. 1, what will you be gathering evidence about? Underline the focusing questions in the prompts above. So I'm going to give you a minute, or I would like you actually hit pause, okay? Hit pause in a second after I tell you what you're going to do. Reread the prompts, and you're going to underline the focusing parts of the question as far as what you need to gather evidence about. Should you underline the entire thing? No. Pick out those key words as far as what it is that you're expected to do. Okay, so hit pause and do that now. Hopefully you hit play and came back, and here I am to continue. All right, you finished number 1. I'm going to be checking that. We'll talk about it in class. Number 2, what information will you need to be able to answer the guiding question? I changed the wording. It should be the prompt. The guiding questions are the prompts to explain your answer. What information will you need? Look carefully at the graphic organizer on the back side of this paper and determine with Mrs. Weber what information will go in the chart where you will find it. And because we're doing this in video format, I'm going to determine it for you. But hopefully you're using your brain right now and you're sticking with me and thinking. So in this chart, we see 4 columns. The first one says detail or evidence. We have page, inference or reasoning used in your writing. In the detail evidence column, I've prompted you. The 5 dimensions, the tesseract, or a problem being caused by the tesseract. Those are the details and the evidence that you need to find in the chapter. In this part down here, where I put quote about the first dimension, quote about the second dimension, you are going to write in those boxes the quotes. Where do you get the quotes from? I hinted at this at the beginning. I didn't hint, I told you. Is it dialogue? Is it something a character says? Well, it might be, but it doesn't have to be. It's going to be the exact words from the book. Putting down what we learn is the first dimension. What we learn is the second dimension. So where do you get that information from? The book. Okay, the next column, page. You need to identify and give credit so that one of your readers, when they find that quote, can go, where did they get that from? They can turn to the book and go, oh, I know which book, or I know which page. So you'll be putting the exact page or page numbers. Sometimes it'll carry on to a second page of where the quote came from. Where do you get that information from? The book. That's right. So smart. Okay. The third column, inference and reasoning. I have a note underneath what these ideas show about the concept of a tesseract and the problems it can cause. What's an inference? What's your reasoning? So an inference is going to be your thoughts and your explanation of what that quote meant. So you will also be writing in this box. Be careful, because quite often when students turn this in, their quote is in this column, the third column. No, your quote is over here. That's specific information from the book. But now we are going to the third column. Where is that information coming from? Can you get it from the book? No, that information is going to come from your brain. You have to think. You have to show me your thinking. You have to write it out. Now, this fourth column, used in your writing, we're not going to do that for chapter 5. Eventually, I will have you complete a chart like this, where you gather the evidence, you write down your reasoning, and then you're going to turn that into a written response. This column here, I'm going to talk in colors. Detail evidence, yellows. This column here, inference reasoning, reds. Putting them into complete sentences. So when you write it out, you should use it in your writing. When you come back to it, you will then check, put a check mark, or just write yes, used in your writing. Or maybe you abandoned it and you'll write no. But you have to do it, okay? Once we get to a point where I'm making you write them out. Chapter 5, we're going to read and gather. You're going to think, use that brain, and put down your reasonings. But the chart is all I'm going to take for chapter 5. All right, so there is a third step that we jumped over. That was step 2, us talking that through, making sure you understand how to fill out that worksheet. Step 3, back on the front side of your paper. Flip back over if you need to look along with me, please. Listen carefully as the chapter is read aloud. Watch for information that will help you complete the graphic organizer. During the read aloud, every time you hear some evidence from the text that you think, use your brain, belongs on the chart, raise your hand. Oh, here's the bummer. I can't see you. Oh. So hopefully you'll have some times where you're thinking to raise your hand, and then I'm going to stop and go, hey, let's put this in the chart. Okay. This will probably be split into 2 lessons, one day with me. So if you're doing this one remotely, the second half of the chart, you'll get to raise your hand when you're in class with me. Yay. Otherwise, so what does the note say? The class will just stop to discuss what you have noticed and decide whether to add that evidence to the chart. If you are working remotely, if you're watching this video, obviously you're working remotely, pay attention to the video and the discussions Mrs. Weber has with you to help you complete the chart. Okay, so we need to go to chapter 5. Let's have our chart handy and ready. I will tell you that they go in order. So we're going to start paying attention for those, information about the Tesseract and the dimensions. And we are in chapter 5. So most of you are in this book that I've been holding up, and you are on page 84. So please turn to page 84. I'm going to read from my favorite book, though, the one I've written all over. So let's please turn to, those of you in the yellow book, page 74. All right, this chapter is called The Tesseract. Yes, Mrs. Witch said, he is behind the darkness, so that even we cannot see him. What happened at the end of chapter 4? They saw the black thing. Meg asks, is that where Father is, right? Is my Father fighting it? And the answer is yes. Father is fighting this evil, dark thing. Meg began to cry, to sob aloud. Through her tears, she could see Charles Wallace standing there, very small, very white. Calvin put his arms around her, but she shuddered and broke away, sobbing wildly. Then she was enfolded in the great wings of Mrs. Whatsit, and she felt comfort and strength pouring through her. Mrs. Whatsit was not speaking aloud, and yet through the wings, Meg understood words. My child, do not despair. Do you think we would have brought you here if there was no hope? We are asking you to do a difficult thing, but we are confident that you can do it. Your Father needs help. He needs courage. And for his children, he may be able to do what he cannot do for himself. Now, Mrs. Witch said, are we ready? Where are we going? Calvin asked. Again, Meg felt an actual physical tingling of fear as Mrs. Witch spoke. We must go behind the shadow. But we will not do it all at once, Mrs. Whatsit comforted them. We will do it in short stages. She looked at Meg. Now we will tesser. We will wrinkle again. Do you understand? No, Meg said flatly. Mrs. Whatsit sighed. Explanations are not easy when they are about things which your civilization still has no words. Calvin talked about traveling at the speed of light. You understand that, little Meg? Yes, Meg nodded. That, of course, is the practical, long way around. We have learned to take shortcuts whenever possible. Sort of like in math? Meg asked. Like in math. Mrs. Whatsit looked over at Mrs. Who. Take your skirt and show them. La experiencia es la madre de la ciencia. Spanish. My dears, Cervantes. So remember, Cervantes would be the person who said that. And then she tells us in English, experience is the mother of knowledge. Mrs. Who took a portion of her white robe in her hands and held it tight. You see, Mrs. Whatsit said, if a very small insect were to move from the section of skirt in which Mrs. Who's right hand, or in Mrs. Who's right hand to that in her left, it would be a long walk for him if he had to walk straight across. Hopefully you have your book handy. But there are actually pictures in our 7th grade book. Yay! So we see this is meant to be her skirt or a string. And there's a long walk across the string would be the normal way. Swiftly, Mrs. Who brought her hands, still holding the skirt, together. Now, you see, Mrs. Whatsit said, he would be there without that long trip. That is how we travel. So now that string or the skirt has been brought closely together. He's jumping across, like a wrinkle. Your mother ever, or you ever talk about having wrinkles in your skirt or your pants? If you wrinkle them, pull them right together, it's gonna be a shorter distance for that ant. Charles Wallace accepted the explanation serenely. There's that word again. Calmly. Yeah, that makes total sense. Even Kelvin did not seem perturbed. Can we travel in that way? Oh dear, Meg sighed. I guess I am a moron. I just don't get it. That is because you think of space in only 3 dimensions, Mrs. Whatsit told her. We travel in the 5th dimension. Have you ever heard of the 5th dimension before? This is something you can understand, Meg. Don't be afraid to try. Was your mother able to explain a tesseract to you? Well, she never did, Meg said. She got so upset about it. Why, Mrs. Whatsit? She said it had something to do with her and father. It was a concept they were playing with, Mrs. Whatsit said, going beyond the 4th dimension to the 5th. Did your mother explain it to you, Charles? Well, yes. Charles looked a little embarrassed. Please don't be hurt, Meg. I just kept at her while you were at school till I got it out of her. Meg sighed. Just explain it to me. Okay, Charles said. What is the 1st dimension? Well, a line. Okay, the 2nd dimension? Well, you'd squared the line. A flat square would be the 2nd dimension. And the 3rd? Well, you'd square the 2nd dimension. Then the square wouldn't be flat anymore. It would have a bottom and sides and a top. See, are you raising your hand at home? Yeah? So here's our picture, those of you who don't have it. 1st dimension is a line. 2nd dimension, a flat square. 3rd dimension, and this is what we're used to, right? You square the square and we end up with a cube. Let's go to our notes. Okay. What is the quote about the 1st dimension? She said, so I'm putting in quotation marks. Well, whoop, a line. Whoops, not a ling, a line. And then that doesn't really look like a line. You can make one straight across. What page are we on? I'm on page 77. Hopefully you have your book handy. You are on page, it's easy to find because there's pictures. There it is. You are on page 87. We're about 10 pages apart, 87. All right, let's keep going here. Quote about the 2nd dimension. Here's her response again. I'm gonna leave the well out this time, okay? You'd square the line. A flat square would be the 2nd dimension. Oh, I forgot to end my quotes up here. Oop, and they're kind of going the wrong direction because the computer doesn't like how I did that. Maybe if I put a period. Yep, it did it. Same page for me is the same page for you guys. Nope, you guys need to turn the page. I didn't put the page numbers in. So 77 or 87 for the 1st and 2nd, right? And then we get into the 3rd with the cube, and those of you in the black book are turning the page. And your quote will be on page 88, and the rest of us will be on page 77 still. So the 3rd dimension, we get again, you'd square the 2nd dimension, then the square wouldn't be flat anymore. It would have a bottom and sides and a top. Okay, be sure to record the page number. As I said, the yellow book 77 and the black book is page 88. Before we continue, what do these 3 dimensions, these ones that we understand, mean? You need to go into these boxes. I'm pointing at it, you can't see it, but hopefully you can see my cursor. Explain in your own words. And it's a little tricky here. Actually, maybe we want to wait until we understand the tesseract a little bit better to go back and explain. I do want to point out, they never said exactly what the 3rd dimension is, but what would you call that? What would you call the non-flat square? I think I already said it. A cube. You might want to include part of that in your reasoning, your inference. Let's continue with the next few. We're trying to wrap up our gathering evidence for the tesseract. Okay, so turning to page 78, or you're on 88 already. And the fourth, well, I guess if you want to put it into mathematical terms, you'd square the square. But you can't take a pencil and draw it the way you can the first three. I know it's got something to do with Einstein and time. I guess maybe you could call the fourth dimension time. That's right, Charles said. Good girl. Okay then, for the fifth dimension, you'd square the fourth, wouldn't you? I guess so. Well, the fifth dimension's a tesseract. You add that to the other four dimensions and you can travel through space without having to go the long way around. In other words, to put it into Euclid or old-fashioned plane geometry, a straight line is not the shortest distance between 2 points. For a brief, illuminating second, Meg's face had the listening, probing expression that was so often seen on Charles's. I see, she cried. I got it. For just a moment, I got it. I can't possibly explain it now, but there for a second, I saw it. She turned excitedly to Kelvin. Did you get it? He nodded. Enough. I don't understand it the way Charles Wallace does, but enough to get the idea. Okay, so we're going to stop there. This one's a little trickier. Let's go back. We have some things to fill in. Okay, so I'm going to pull my chart down. And we got to find a quote about the fourth dimension. This one might be a little bit trickier. And I want you to put more than just the one word. Okay, so look at that conversation part where they start to explain it. Pick out what you feel is the best quote. When you're ready, you can pause me, write it down, come back when you're ready for the fifth. Are you back? Did you pause? All right, so the fifth dimension, we now need a quote. I have a great big red asterisk right next to it. You probably want that quote. Or you could actually, so the fifth dimension squared this fourth, wouldn't you? Or the big star is next to, well, the fifth dimension's a tesseract. Okay. Then it continues though, as in part of the explanation. You might want that part. You can travel through space without having to go the long way around. Now, this, well, pause me. Are you back? We have one more spot here, and I probably screwed that up, a quote about the tesseract. That's where you wanted to put that last part that I just said. Traveling through space without having to go the long way around. Okay, so make sure that you have all of your quotes on the left-hand column, each of the page numbers. And now, before we continue, or if you want to come back to it, it's up to you, because we are going to experience some of this, that you might understand it a little bit better. But truly, this is science fiction. This is not obviously something that can really happen, but it is a theory that's out there in science as far as being able to travel through time and space. So you're going to have to be able to explain what that means the best that you can. I want to read just a little bit more so that we can get a little further into the chapter before I stop this lesson, either at the end of this lesson, or if you choose to pause, make sure that you have your inferences, your thinking, and your explanation in that third column. Okay, so we're coming back. You're on page 88 or 89, and I'm on page 78. Or you may be too. Some of you have this book. And we're down towards the bottom. Mrs. Witch is going to talk. So now we go, Mrs. Witch said. There is not all the time in the world. Could we hold hands? Meg asked. Calvin took her hand and held it tightly in his. You can try, Mrs. Whatsit said, though I'm not sure how it will work. You see, though we travel together, we travel alone. What? We will go first and take you afterward in the backwash. That may be easier for you. As she spoke, the great white body began to waver, the wings to dissolve into mist. Mrs. Who seemed to evaporate until there was nothing but the glasses. And then the glasses, too, disappeared. It reminded Meg of the Cheshire Cat. That is an allusion and a reference to another piece of literature. How many of you know it? I hope you do. Alice in Wonderland, Cheshire Cat, just the grin is left. But in this case, Mrs. Who, just her spectacles or her glasses are left. I've often seen a face without glasses, she thought, but a glasses without a face? I wonder if I go that way too. First me and then my glasses. She looked over at Mrs. Witch. Mrs. Witch was there, and then she wasn't. There was a gust of wind and a great thrust and a sharp shattering as she was shoved through what? Then darkness, silence, nothingness. If Calvin was still holding her hand, she could not feel it. But this time she was prepared for the sudden and complete dissolution of her body. When she felt the tingling coming back to her fingertips, she knew that this journey was almost over, and she could feel again the pressure of Calvin's hand about hers. Without warning, coming as a complete and unexpected shock, she felt a pressure that she had never imagined, as though she were being completely flattened out by an enormous steamroller. This was far worse than the nothingness that had been. While she was nothing, there was no need to breathe. But now her lungs were squeezed together so that although she was dying for want of air, there was no way for her lungs to expand and contract, to take in the air that she must have to stay alive. This was completely different from the thinning of atmosphere when they flew up in the mountain and she had to put the flowers to her face to breathe. She tried to gasp, but a paper doll cannot gasp. She thought she was trying to think, but her flattened out mind was as unable to function as her lungs. Her thoughts were squashed along with the rest of her. Her heart tried to beat. It gave a knife-like sidewise movement, but it could not expand. But then she seemed to hear a voice, or if not a voice, at least words flattened out like printed words on paper. Oh no, we can't stop here. This is a two-dimensional planet, and the children can't manage here. So remember that when we just went through our dimensions, the second dimension was the flat square. There's no depth to it. So it's flattening the kids. They really can't survive there. She was whizzed into nothingness again, and nothingness was wonderful. She did not mind that she could not feel Calvin's hand, but she could not see or feel or be. The relief from the intolerable pressure was all she needed. So I forgot to add vocabulary words to this chapter, but intolerable meaning unbearable, okay? Normally that would be a vocab word. Then the tingling began to come back to her fingers, her toes. She could feel Calvin holding her tightly. Her heart beat regularly. Blood coursed through her veins. Whatever had happened, whatever mistake had been made, it was over now. She thought she heard Charles Wallace saying, his words round and full as spoken words ought to be, "Really, Mrs. Witch, you might have killed us." This time, she was pushed out of the frightening fifth dimension with a sudden, immediate jerk. There she was, herself again, standing with Calvin beside her, holding on to her hand for dear life, and Charles Wallace in front of her, looking indignant. Again, indignant, angrily aroused by something unfair. "How dare you take us to a two-dimensional planet?" Mrs. Whatsit, Mrs. Who, and Mrs. Witch were not visible, but she knew that they were there. The fact of their presence was strong about her. "Children, I apologize," came Mrs. Witch's voice. "Now, Charles, calm down," Mrs. Whatsit said, appearing not as the great and beautiful beast she had been when they last saw her, but in her familiar wild garb of shawls and scarves and the old tramp's coat and hat. You know how difficult it is for her to materialize. If you are not substantial yourself, it's very difficult to realize how limiting protoplasm is. Did anybody put their hand up? What are are we looking for? What was the other? We finished the first prompt. What was the second? I'm going to stop the lesson here because I'm pretty sure I'm close to the end of it. But I want you to go back. Look at the second prompt. Did we maybe just get a detail for the second prompt? Fill it in. We'll talk about it when I see you. Have a great day.